Everybody, so today we're going to be reviewing the book entitled Hinduism in Middle India, Narasimha, the Lord of the Middle, written by Dr. Lavanya Vemsani. This book is an overview, as the title implies, of Hinduism in Middle India and how the god Narasimha is essentially at the center of worship in this region of India. Throughout the book, Dr. Vemsani makes it clear, all while using archaeological evidence as well as DNA evidence, written texts, and oral traditions as evidence that Narasimha himself has been a part of Middle India for thousands of years, possibly dating back to the Neolithic era. In doing so, Dr. Vemsani points out that this is direct evidence that Hinduism was not introduced to India during the so-called Aryan invasion, but has been around for thousands of years. As far as why I've chosen to read this book and subsequently do a review on it, I was required to read the first 6 chapters of this book for a class entitled History of Hinduism, taught by none other than Professor Vemsani herself, who I have to admit is a wonderful professor and very knowledgeable in her field. I have an interest in the area of religious studies, and Hinduism is one of those religions that has always struck me as interesting, and I have learned a lot while not only taking her class, but from reading this book as well. This book is 239 pages long from front to back, and it comes in a hardcover, which I am a big fan of. The cover itself is very aesthetically pleasing. I personally love the color scheme that was used here, as well as the picture presented on the cover. It just has a calm and relaxing vibe to it, which I really liked. As far as the book itself, aside from the cover, I really like the paper that was used in the book as well. Well, this may not be a big deal to others. The thickness and the texture is fairly nice, as well as the color of white that was chosen here. As far as when you lay the book open, I'm a big fan of this. One reason I like hardcovers, it for the most part seems to stay open. Sorry, I got some stuff highlighted here. Pretty much for where you open the page. I mean, it is a relatively new book, so it's not broke in quite that well, but seems to stay right where you want it for the most part, which I am a very big fan of. One final thing, I did really like the size of the font. It wasn't too hard to read, even for someone who does not wear glasses, such as myself. Sometimes I'll be reading a book and I feel like the font sometimes is a little bit too small, but it was not the case here. The only real negative point I have about this book is the price, which is currently at $115. I'll be providing a link in the description box below if you'd like to check it out. Now, about the author. Much of what I'm about to say here can be found either on the back of the book itself or at the Shawnee State University website, or even just a simple Google search for Dr. Lavanya Vemsani. Dr. Lavanya Vemsani is a professor of history at Shawnee State University, where I'm currently attending, actually getting ready to graduate with my bachelor's degree. She has also served as a visiting professor at, and I hope I don't screw this up too bad, but Jawaharlal Nehru University in India. Sorry, my pronunciation is probably off. I did the best I could there. Her other books include Hindu and Jain Mythology of Balarama, which was 2006, Krishna in History, Thought, and Culture, 2016, Hinduism in Text and Context, 2018, Feminine Journeys of the Mahabharata. Again, hopefully I'm pronouncing some of these correctly. If I'm not, I do apologize. That was released in 2021. And of course, this book, Hinduism in Middle India, Narasimha, the Lord of the Middle, which was published just in 2023. So needless to say, this book is fairly hot off the press. Dr. Vemsani holds an impressive 2 doctorate degrees, one of which is in religious studies, which she obtained from the University of McMaster in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and the other in history from the University of Hyderabad in India. So, needless to say, she is more than qualified to educate in this subject, and it was an absolute pleasure to be taught by her. As far as my review of the book's contents, I'm leaving out a lot of details as not to spoil anything for those who wish to read it. I also am not very well educated in Hinduism, and I'm not trying to provide any educational material on this subject whatsoever. Each chapter of this book is broke down into subsections, which I'm a huge fan of for when conducting research. You are trying to find a specific part of the book to obtain a specific piece of information. It comes in handy to have these subsections, so you don't necessarily have to skim the entire chapter to find the piece of information that you're looking for. My only issue, it's not that big of a deal, that these subsections are not listed on the contents page under each chapter. I've used books with these types of listings on the contents page before, and it comes very much in handy and is very convenient, so you don't even have to skim the chapter to find that subsection. You can just go right to the contents page and go straight to it. That's not the case with this book, however. Again, not that big of a deal, but it would be a little more handy, and I do prefer it. Another positive thing about this book is that it's very clear from the beginning of each chapter as to what the chapter will be about. As many of you may know, sometimes the title of the chapter itself is not always indicative of the exact subject matter in which the chapter contains. This, however, is not the case with this book at all. Not only are the chapters duly named for their content, but the first paragraph or two of the chapters always make it very clear as to what the chapter will be about, which I love. I have read books before where not only did the title of the chapter not give me really any clue as to what I was getting ready to read, or if it did, it wasn't very much of one. But even a few pages in, I was like, oh, okay, so this is what this chapter is about. No, not the case here. It's very clear. As previously mentioned, one aim of this book is to help debunk the Aryan invasion theory by supplying the reader with evidence that can date back to the Neolithic era, such as cave paintings that depict deities such as Narasimha himself, as well as previously mentioned using textual evidence as well as oral traditions from across the region. This is something that I believe that the author has done a very excellent job of doing. On a controversial note, some academics shy away from using oral traditions as evidence since it is not clear if the story has changed from generation to generation. This, however, is exactly how all these classical texts that we rely on today started as oral stories, passed down from generation to generation, often by the religious leaders of whatever culture or whatever tribe that you may be talking about. So that being said, I see no issue with oral traditions being used whatsoever. Throughout the text, the author mentions many temples throughout Middle India and does a very good job explaining their importance by giving many examples as well as great explanations into the known history of the sites. These explanations of these temples spans several chapters of the book, actually, and I believe that the evidence given here is very well researched and organized by the author. To conclude, I believe that this book is very insightful for those who are trying to reach either a better understanding of Hinduism in general, or even if you're seeking more of an elaboration on the god known as Narasimha. Now, I must say, is a very interesting deity. I had never heard of him prior to reading this book. Again, I highly recommend it. The author really drives home her point of moving away from the Aryan invasion theory point of view as a way to truly understand the history of not only India, but Hinduism as a whole, and I believe has done an excellent job proving her point throughout this book. And again, I'm going to be leaving a link in the description box below if you'd like to check the book out. It is on Amazon. I will also be leaving a link to my Goodreads account if you'd like to follow me there, see what I'm reading. I'm usually reading several books at once. Other than that, like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Leave a comment below. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.